I speak 9 languages. The little black girl's voice sliced through the noise of the grand hall. Every chair, every glass, every careless laugh seemed to freeze in that instant. Victor Hale, the millionaire host, lifted his cold drink glass, pausing for just a second, and then burst out laughing. His booming laughter echoed all the way to the glittering chandeliers above. 9 languages. Child, if you can speak even one properly, that would already be a miracle. The guests followed his lead. Some chuckled softly behind their hands, others exchanged mocking glances across the room. But the girl, wearing a faded dress and scuffed shoes, stood tall. There was no shame in her eyes, no fear, only a strange, quiet confidence. A sharp crackle of feedback from the microphone pierced the silence behind her. Suddenly, every sound in the hall felt magnified, the rustle of gowns, the clink of glasses, even the millionaire's shallow breathing. For Victor, it was nothing more than a ridiculous claim. But in the next few moments, when the girl opened her mouth again, what poured out would leave him, and the entire room, frozen in disbelief. Victor Hale had built his life on power, money, and control. From the moment he stepped into a room, people adjusted their posture, lowered their voices, and searched for his approval. His fortune stretched across continents, business empires in New York, London, Dubai. Men twice his age feared him, politicians shook his hand with trembling smiles. To the outside world, Victor was untouchable. Yet behind the walls of his marble mansion, the silence was deafening. The endless dining table often sat with only one chair occupied, his. The laughter of family, the warmth of companionship, had long been replaced by the cold echo of footsteps on polished floors. His life was full, yet empty in all the ways that mattered. The gala that night was meant to be another performance, another chance to show his power to those beneath him. The chandeliers, the velvet drapes, the orchestral music swelling in the background, everything had been designed to prove a point, that Victor Hale's name alone was enough to create grandeur. And then came the girl. No one had expected her to be there. She didn't wear silk or satin. Her shoes were worn thin, her dress stitched in places where the fabric had given up. While the guests sipped cold drink and exchanged stories of vacations and business ventures, she walked with the kind of poise that did not come from wealth, but from something far rarer, self-belief. She had been brought in quietly by one of the organizers who ran a program for underprivileged children. A token gesture, meant to impress donors, nothing more. But the moment she stepped onto the stage, she no longer looked like a token. She looked like a challenge. Victor watched her with faint amusement, the kind a predator has for prey that dares to bare its teeth. The crowd was waiting for her to fail, to stutter, to shrink back under the weight of 1,000 eyes. Instead, she lifted her chin, smiled, and said the words that silenced the room. I speak 9 languages. For Victor, it was an absurdity. For the guests, it was a joke. But for the girl, it was only the beginning. The laughter still lingered in the air, but the girl didn't shrink. Instead, she took a single step closer to the microphone. Her small hands trembled only slightly as she adjusted it to her height. Then, without hesitation, she spoke again, this time not in English. Je parle français. Her tone was flawless, her accent sharp and clean. The room went quiet for half a heartbeat, caught between confusion and disbelief. Before the silence could harden into mockery again, she switched. Hablar español es fácil para mí. Gasps rippled across the front row. A woman's jeweled hand froze halfway to her glass. And then she continued, Italian, Portuguese, German. Each word rolled effortlessly from her tongue, crisp and natural, as if she had lived in those languages all her life. Victor's smirk faltered, though he tried to hide it with another sip of cold drink. His eyes darted quickly across the room, searching for someone to confirm that what he was hearing wasn't real. But the crowd was no longer laughing. They were staring. Staring at the child who had just shattered every assumption in the room. Some guests leaned forward, others whispered furiously, but no one could deny it anymore. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't memorization. This was mastery. And all the while, the girl stood calmly, as if the spotlight was exactly where she belonged. Her shoes were worn, her dress was plain, yet she carried herself with the poise of royalty. Victor set his glass down, a faint clink against the marble table beside him. His fingers tightened, knuckles pale. For the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't buy, silence or control. It was doubt. The kind that crawls into a man's chest when he realizes the world might not bend as easily to him as it always had. The girl tilted her head slightly, her voice soft but firm. "Shall I continue?" And for once, no one dared to laugh. Whispers began to rise like a storm at sea. Impossible. She must have memorized it. No child can do this. Someone's feeding her lines. The guests who once laughed now turned sharp, suspicious. Their pride, born of wealth and education, could not allow them to believe that a poor little girl stood above them in something they could never master. Victor seized on that hesitation. His smirk returned, though tighter this time, more forced. He rose from his chair, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Parlor tricks," he declared. "That is all this is. Children can memorize phrases. Any circus performer can mimic a sound. Do you truly expect us, to believe she commands 9 languages?" The hall rumbled with uneasy agreement. A few nodded. A few frowned. The crowd was torn. The girl met his gaze calmly. She did not fidget, did not look away. Her eyes were steady, as though she had been preparing for this exact moment. Victor stepped closer to the stage, his shoes striking the marble floor with deliberate power. He wanted to intimidate her, to remind everyone of the weight his name carried. "You stand here, dressed like a beggar, in front of men and women who have built empires, and you claim superiority?" His voice rose. "You claim what even scholars spend lifetimes chasing?" The silence was suffocating. The orchestra had stopped. Even the waiters froze in place, trays balanced mid-air. The girl finally spoke, her tone unwavering. "I don't claim anything, sir. I simply speak the truth." Her words were simple, yet they cut deeper than any insult. Victor's jaw tightened. He could feel the eyes of the room shifting, watching not just her, but him. If she was right, his laughter had made him a fool. If she was wrong, she would be exposed. But one thing was certain, this was no longer entertainment. This was a challenge. A challenge to Victor's pride, to his reputation, and to the very image of power he had spent his life creating. And as the little girl stood waiting, poised like a warrior in a child's body, the weight of that challenge pressed heavy against him, and he could not laugh anymore. The girl took a slow breath, her small fingers curling around the microphone. The weight of the entire hall pressed against her, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she began to speak. Not in English, not in French, but in flawless Mandarin. Her tones sharp, precise, rolling like music across the stunned room. A Chinese diplomat seated near the front shot up from his chair, eyes wide. "She is perfect, her accent, it's native." Before the shock could settle, she shifted again. Arabic. Smooth, lyrical, every word pronounced with reverence. Then Russian, hard, commanding, her voice steady as steel. Gasps tore through the hall. Hands flew to mouths. Eyes darted from her small frame to Victor, who stood frozen, his glass trembling in his hand. The girl did not pause. Language after language spilled from her lips, 9 in total. Each one flawless. Each one undeniable. By the time she finished, silence thundered louder than any applause. No one moved. No one breathed. Finally, she looked directly at Victor. Her voice softened, returning to English. "You laughed at me. But you cannot laugh at the truth." Victor's face drained of color. The room that once obeyed his every word now belonged to her. And in that moment, the millionaire, the man who thought he ruled every stage, was left standing, powerless, as a child rewrote the meaning of brilliance before his very eyes. For a long moment, the silence refused to break. The chandeliers still glittered, the cold drink still sparkled in half-empty glasses, but the air was heavier than stone. Victor Hale, the man who had mocked, dismissed, and laughed the loudest, lowered his gaze. His hand, once so steady, shook as he set the glass down. For the first time in years, the crowd did not look to him for direction, they looked to her. The girl did not smile in triumph. She did not gloat. She simply stood tall, her chin lifted, her eyes calm. She had nothing to prove anymore. The truth had spoken for itself. Slowly, hesitantly, Victor stepped forward. His shoes, once symbols of power, now echoed with humility. He stopped at the edge of the stage, looking up at her, his voice quieter than anyone had ever heard. You are remarkable." The girl blinked, surprised by the sincerity. The crowd watched in awe as the man who had owned their respect for decades now offered it freely to a child in a faded dress. A ripple of applause began at the back of the hall. Then, another. Until the entire room stood to its feet, clapping, not for the wealth, not for the chandeliers, not for Victor Hale, but for her. The girl's smile returned at last. Not proud, not arrogant, just hopeful. Because in that moment, she had changed something far greater than a room full of skeptics. She had changed a man who believed the world could only be bought. And as Victor bowed his head, humbled, the hall filled not with laughter, but with respect. If this story moved you, give it a thumbs up, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Tell us in the comments, what language would you love to learn?